Hello and welcome to another Chatbox podcast. It's episode 62 here today and the last ever Chatbox podcast. Wow, it's the last ever one. Brilliant. It's been a journey, hasn't it, everybody? I'll be back soon doing another one, but today it's the last ever one. So yeah, let's get on with it, shall we? How are you doing? Right, let's crack on. As you know, each week I have a guest to talk about their career or their job. So let's crack on with this week's guest. It's broadcast. My guest today is broadcaster Adam Marsden. Hello, Adam. Welcome
Good
along.
afternoon. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Yourself?
I'm all right, yeah. I've just been busy today and a few other days, so yeah, I'm fine though.
Excellent.
Happy to be doing a thing I love.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a pleasure to be a part of it. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Pleasure as always. 5 questions about broadcasting, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you ready to rumble in the jungle?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go for it. Question 1. Where did you start your broadcast career?
I started my broadcast career at Peak FM in Chesterfield. I was at college at the time, and they'd been told that they'd been offered a 2-week work placement at Peak FM, and they'd offered it me, and I obviously accepted it. And it was 2 weeks, Monday to Friday, working in all different areas of the radio station, learning a lot more about radio. And for me, that's where I first fell in love with radio and started to enjoy it a little bit more. I mean, I'd always listened to the radio and been kind of intrigued with how it worked, but by working inside the radio station, I learned a lot more about it, met a lot of the people, spoke to them about their careers and how they'd got into radio, and it was a thoroughly enjoyable experience for me. And then a couple of months later, at the end of that academic year, I was informed that there was an opportunity for the weekend slot to potentially go down and produce the sports show on a weekly basis with Gav P. And I, again, accepted it. I spoke to Gav about it. He invited me in. And I think I spent 3 years then working with Peak, and I only left that because I opted to go to university to do a degree in journalism and radio production. But I'll never forget the opportunity they gave me and the appreciation I'll show for Gav, for Richie, for Paul Harvey, Richie Pearson, Paul Harvey, and Sean Goldsmith, people that during the time when I was working on the sports show for that 3 years, very much taught me what I needed to know to get into the industry.
Is that Paul Harvey, the voiceover guy, and who does a bit of work at different radio stations as well as Chesterfield Radio?
I believe so. He was at the time he was working at Peak, but I don't believe he was there full time at the time of me working there on the sports show. He was on occasion stepping in for Richie and for Gav when they were unavailable, but the majority of the time it was Richie and Gav that I was working with on the sports show. Paul Harvey occasionally stepped in for when Sean was unavailable, and Sean did the show before we started usually.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great place to start your career. Question 2. Who were your inspirations in broadcasting when you were growing up?
My inspirations, the majority of the time, what I enjoyed doing was watching the football and talking about the football, and I always thought it was going to be something that I wanted to get into. And when I used to go home and away, majority of the time, first couple of years, we had season tickets for home games. Myself, my brother, and my dad, we all went to those games, and we'd sit back in the car afterwards and listen to the sports show on Peak FM, which was known then as Back of the Net, and that was Simon Towers, Naz Premji, Alan Wilkinson, that would cover Chesterfield for you. And some games when we couldn't get, we'd listen to the commentary on the radio. And for me, I thought this is the job for me. I mean, I enjoy watching the football. When I was young, I'd sit and collect the football cards, the stickers. I'd read about the football. I'd have loads of books, annuals that I'd read through for statistics on different teams and players, and I'd obviously learn a lot through that. And then I thought, well, then I can go on and talk about it. And there's actually a job where I can sit and talk about football that actually exists. And that immediately became something that I wanted to head towards. And the first and main commentator that I'd say that I listened to is the legendary John Motson. I remember we went to a car boot sale, and there was a tape recorder. That's how long ago it was. A tape recorder of John Motson talking about his career and his route into being a football commentator. And my grandma bought it for me, and we sat down, and I listened to it endlessly to learn about his way into it. And I remember watching the documentaries not too long ago after he retired about the sort of research that goes into it. I mean, I understand that when you're a football commentator, you have to put a lot of research into what you're doing anyway. But seeing the amount of research that he put into every single week just inspired me even more. So I've kind of followed that sort of research technique that he has, where regardless of whether you're watching the game or not, you have the notes ready so that when it's time for you to come along and cover that team, you've already got the notes, so you can look and create your own statistics that makes it even more interesting for the listener on radio or the viewer on TV. So for me, it was the big one was John Motson. I'd probably say Martin Tyler was another one who I met quite recently. It must be about 10 years ago now, when Chesterfield played Middlesbrough. I remember my granddad, myself, and a friend of mine, we got tickets to go and watch that game. And I went up to try and find our seats, and our seats had actually been taken by Martin Tyler and Chris Kamara, who was doing the commentary for that game, because it was being broadcast on Sky as this big thing because of what happened in 1997 between Chesterfield and Middlesbrough. And I said, our seats aren't here. It's where Chris Kamara and Martin Tyler are sat. And I was kind of thinking, wow, this is incredible. The commentators have effectively stolen our seat because they'd made a little area for them so that they got a great view of the game. And obviously we'd been moved along still quite close, and I managed to have a talk with Chris Kamara, and slightly a little bit towards Martin Tyler as well. He was obviously doing his research and preparing himself for the game. So it was great to see him at work as opposed to hearing about how they work, if that makes sense. Actually seeing him prepare for the game was very good and a big inspiration for me to get that opportunity.
Yeah, brilliant. And also, you say Chris Kamara, he lives in the Peak, South Yorkshire region.
Yeah, that's the only time I've actually seen him. I got his autograph on the programme, which I have put away obviously after the game. But that's the only time I've ever seen him, and I watched what he was doing and what Martin Tyler was doing as well to get a bit more of an idea. I mean, at the time, 10 years ago, I was still quite young. It's probably over 10 years, actually. It was before I went to university. So I was still quite young and still getting more of a grasp of what it was that you had to do behind the scenes, because it's all good watching the football and hearing the commentators and knowing a little bit about what they're doing, but it's a bit more of a different side of things, isn't it? Sitting and watching what they're doing and seeing the behind the scenes preparation that they put towards it. And no, for me, it was just an incredible experience to be able to see people like Chris Kamara and like Martin Tyler, who have now done this for years and been very, very good at it.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, that's brilliant. And we'll move on to question 3 now. And you might answer this nicely, goodly. What is your favourite part about the job?
Favourite part of the job? I get to watch football, a sport that I absolutely love, and I get to talk about it. That for me is I love football. I love talking about football. I could sit for hours upon hours talking about football, and I get to sit there, enjoy watching it and talking about it. And for me, that's just a completely different level of things. I know there'll be people out there that say that sounds boring, or that they're not football fans, and that's fair enough. But for me, sitting there and being able to talk about football is just incredible within itself. And then watching it whilst it's live at the same time, you never know really what to expect, and you just have to think on your feet. And it's kind of the thinking on the feet that I do enjoy about it, being able to just I wouldn't say like blag it, but being able to think on your feet and give those sort of descriptions and knowing the statistics and talk to people about it and speak to ex-footballers that have been in that situation. I mean, covering a penalty shootout and you sat next to a footballer who's either missed a penalty or taken a penalty and scored one in important matches during their career, and you can talk to them about it and hear from them, so you get more of an understanding of what the players are going through. I mean, I enjoy playing football and I play Sunday League football, but I've never been to the ability that during a Saturday League game, whether that's in the lower levels or in the higher levels of football, I've never been in a situation where I've had to deal with the nerves of taking a penalty in a penalty shootout, or handle the pressure of a big game in front of 5,000-6,000 or a cup final or anything like that. So hearing about it from actual footballers that have been in that situation and hearing about what's going through their mind at the time, it gives you a different perspective of what's actually going on. Because as a kid, if a player misses a great opportunity or a goalkeeper misses the ball and it goes in, and sometimes you think they could have done better, it's so easy to be able to sit there and scrutinise the players' performances. But then when you hear from the players, that you can hear what's going through the mind of the players at halftime when they're 3-0 down, or what do you do when you're 2-0 up within the first 20 minutes just to make sure complacency doesn't settle in. It's easy for me to sit here and say they just need to make sure complacency doesn't settle in. But then when you're talking to a player who's been in that sort of position and they know about it, it's a different experience completely. And I think one of my favourite parts, you're going to sit and talk about football, but you're going to sit and talk to people about the situation of what's going on the pitch. And there's been players that when I grew up, I only ever dreamed of sitting alongside and talking about. And I mean, on the radio show that I do a couple of weeks ago, we did an end of season discussion about Chesterfield's end of season, obviously when it ended against Notts County. I think it was a week after. We spoke to a lot of ex-Chesterfield players and people like Jamie Hewitt, who, when I grew up watching players like Jamie Hewitt and like Mark Hallett and players like that and Steve Fletcher, that I've interviewed all three of them and I've spoken to all three of them, sitting there growing up watching these sort of players, you think it's just a distant dream that you'll never reach, that you'll be able to sit there and actually talk to these players about their career and what's going through their minds and players' minds in their sort of situation. I remember interviewing Mark Hallett shortly after Jack Lester got the job as Chesterfield manager, back when we were still within the Football League. And Mark Hallett is an absolute hero of mine on the pitch. He was a player that for me was absolutely incredible. And being able to interview him about his career and the now signing of Jack Lester, or then signing of Jack Lester as manager, and what Jack Lester was like in the changing room as a captain, as a leader back when they played together, it gives you a different perspective of it. And I think one of the favourite parts has to be hearing from the players about what's happening on the pitch. I understand, obviously, as a commentator, that's my job to talk about it, but there's nothing that's going to be hearing from a player about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's brilliant. You're getting the inside story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll move on now to question 4. How has COVID affected your life and line of work?
It's pretty much made it redundant. I mean, I for one never thought that I'd see a pandemic happen. I thought with the line of medicine that we're in, the level of medicine that we're in, it wouldn't be something that we'd ever have to worry about. But then COVID came along and proved me wrong. And I've obviously followed all protocols that I've needed to try and help out where I can and do my bit. And unfortunately, that has meant not going to football. Football, of course, at the levels that I've been covering, whether it's Staveley, Dronfield, Chesterfield, of course, as well, to an extent, was all effectively made redundant, and football wasn't allowed to continue. So it's massively affected it, because I wasn't able to go to work, and it then meant I'd got 4 hours of sports talk to fill when transfers weren't allowed to happen, clubs weren't allowed to chat, and of course football weren't allowed to go ahead. So it made it extremely difficult to talk 4 hours about not just football, but then sports like rugby, Formula One, cricket, golf. They all ended up stopping to obviously make things a little bit easier on the NHS and help stop the spread of COVID. So whilst it was disappointing, it was understandable why it needed to happen. It was just also kind of disappointing because it meant I couldn't go and cover the football. So it massively made it redundant.
Yeah, and that's good, getting the inside story. And now we'll move on to the last question on my list. What advice would you give to young, aspiring broadcasters who are starting out?
My advice would be to never burn bridges, so to speak. You always leave wherever you work on good terms, because you never know when that opportunity is going to come and who that opportunity is going to come from. And if you leave anybody on bad terms, then they're not going to look for you for that sort of work. I mean, this level of work, this side of work, is majority of the time freelance, and a lot of what you need is the contacts. And a lot of people say it is who you know, not what you know. And I think to an extent that might be right. So for me, I think one of the most important things is you don't burn your bridges. You make sure wherever you work, whatever you leave, you always leave on good terms to ensure that if there's an opportunity for you to go back or for them to bring you back, that opportunity is always there, that door's always open. And for me, that's absolutely something that I think you've got to go with as you move forward into your careers, and never give up. Because for me, I was sat there, as I say, as a child, thinking it was never going to happen and it was just a distant dream, and then the opportunities have arose. And I mean, I'm doing full match commentaries and live updates on radio shows for the last now 5-6 years, and I was doing it during my time at university actually as well, so you could probably spread that to 7 or 8 years. So yeah, for me, it's been a fantastic experience, and I think a lot of that is the never give up attitude, because you never know where that opportunity is going to come from. And with this line of work, it is all freelance, so the opportunity might just be around the corner. So make sure that the bridges aren't burnt, so that they can give you those opportunities.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's it for today, Adam.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. And that's it from the Chatbox podcast. We may return one day, who knows, but I'm still going to be podcasting with all my different podcasts. And now, but for now, that's it from the Chatbox podcast. And for now, please give it up for Adam Marsden.
Thank you very much.
Do join me again soon for another podcast. But for now, thank you very much for watching and listening. And that's a wrap.